All right, Jabosai, good morning. Let us begin. So first, let's start by thanking our sponsors. We begin by thanking our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tishrei, Steve and Terry Zinn, in memory of their parents, Tzvi Hirsch ben Yosef HaKohen, Yentel Mindel Bas David Halevi Bunim Tzvi ben Chaim, and Devorah Bas Yisrael Yoel. A week of learning sponsors, Brian and Melanie Levine. In honor of all of the Shiurim, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless us with the continued opportunity to share His Torah and Amir Hashem to come closer together. To thank Ira and Miriam Grossman for dedicating the week of learning in memory of Ira's father, Melvin Melech ben Azriel. Zichron Levracha, we open in the merit of our Talmud Torah. The Neshamos will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. And also with that, let us begin. So we are picking up today. Today's daf is Nun Tes 59, and we are picking up Amir Hashem on Nun Ches Amud Beis 58b at the Mishnah. Sorry, let's put this over here at the Mishnah. Okay. So what's with that? Let us. What's happening here? Okay. Let us begin. So it says the Mishnah. Nun Ches Amud Beis 58b. Ein modedin ela min hamumcha. So we'll say the halacha is now in measuring the tchum. We measure the tchum only with an expert. Rashi says boki b'medida. Obviously, again, as we've spent a significant amount of time discussing, the measurement of the tchum is a significant issue, right, and a significant malacha, both in terms of how to measure and in terms of from where to measure. Except for the Mishnah just simply says only an expert should do it. Riba l'makom echad, u'mi'et l'makom echad, shomer l'makom sheriba. So we'll see what this means in the Gemara, but essentially what it sounds like it's saying is as follows. If halacha l'maisa, let's say the person who measured the tchum, on one side the tchum extended out a certain amount, and on the other side it didn't extend as far out. So let's say, for example, on the eastern side, so on the left of the eastern side the tchum measured out towards a certain amount, and on the right it measured out a different amount. On the left it was longer than on the right. What's the halacha? Shomin l'makom sheriba. We'll say we go ahead and we establish the tchum according to the longer distance. So the Gemara says, Riba la'achad u'mi'et la'achad. What happens if it was longer on one side? Well, literally longer on one, shorter on the other. Shomin l'meruba. We listen to the longer one. Now, we'll say now at first glance, that statement sounds repetitive. Thank you. It sounds repetitive. We'll see exactly what the Mishnah means to convey. We'll say, but Bepashtos, what it's saying is, if it turns out that when you go ahead and you look at the tchum, that halacha l'maisa, there's some type of disparity in the measurement. So on one side it's longer, one side it's shorter. When I say one side, I don't mean like on the north it's longer and on the south it's shorter. I mean like on the north side, just one tchum marker on one side is further out, one tchum marker is a little bit closer in. The Mishnah indicates to me that halacha l'maisa, I go with the longer measurement. The second statement, as Rashi points out, appears to be repetitive. We'll see exactly in the Gemara what the deeper meaning of it is. Next, says the Gemara, even an Eved, even a Shivcha are believed to say that the Tchum goes until this particular place. So in other words, let's say you're dealing with a situation where there aren't Tchum markers, so you have to rely then on the statement of the townspeople in order to go ahead and say the Tchum goes to here. What the Mishnah is highlighting to us is that even someone who's not normally fit to give testimony is believed to go ahead and comment on the boundaries of the Tchum. Ultimately, again, so I'll say literally translated, because the Chachamim did not say this, did not espouse this halacha, to be machmir, but rather to be mekel. So we'll see exactly what this means, because they both say this sounds a little bit actually counterintuitive. Remember, again, tchumin are drabanan, and tchumin are a chumra drabanan. So essentially what we'll see in the Gemara is, as much as Chazal legislated the halacha of tchumin, but Chazal ultimately again said that when dealing with matters of tchumin, when there's a suffix, we're mekel. That's not unique to tchumin. What is that called? That's called suffix derabanan lekula. That in general, whenever you have a doubt regarding rabbinic law, we are always mekel. Good, we'll see that in the Gemara as well. Top of Nun Tes. So the Gemara says, Lamakom sheriba in, lamakom shemiet lo. So we'll say, when you read the Mishnah, remember again, let's go back to the case where let's say we'll call it on the north side. So on the north side, the left side marker extends to x, and the right side marker extends to x plus y. Right? So what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that you can go l'makom sheriba. You can go to the place of the extended marker. So the Gemara says, does that mean you go to the place of the extended marker, but not to the closer marker? No. What it means, Rabbi say, is you could even go to the place of the extended marker. So for example, in this case, if on the north side, again, the left-hand marker went until distance x, the right-hand marker went until x plus y. Essentially, we look at the further distance, right? The right marker, the x plus y, as the defined boundary of the tchum. And again, we'll go ahead and we'll draw our line across over there. So says the Gemara, Riba le'echad u'miyet le'echad. It said again, if let's say the distance was increased for one and decreased by the other, so we'll say hasulamali hainuhach. So we'll say at first glance it would appear that the Mishnah is repeating the same statement twice. It's the same statement twice, namely again that halacha l'maaseh, when measuring the tchum, one side is longer than the other, we go by the longer side. So why the need to state the same halacha twice? Hachi ka'amar riba echad u'miyet echad shomin lazesh riba. Oh, I will say case number 2 is introducing something different. Case number 1 is when you had a disparity between the markers. So for example, on the north side, the left side marker went for a certain distance and the right side marker extended even further. So there the Mishnah teaches me that we'll judge the tchum based on the right side marker. The second case in the Mishnah Bosai is there's a disparity between two people who were measuring the tchum. Reuven says the tchum goes until x. Shimon says the tchum goes until x plus y. There the Mishnah teaches me that what? We go according to the more makel opinion. So we'll go according to Shimon, who says that the tchum goes to x plus y. Amar Abaye, that's assuming, I will say, that Shimon, who says that the tchum is larger, doesn't have such a disparity with Reuven. In other words, I will say, as long as their difference is not more than the diagonal of the tchum, then halacha l'maaseh you could go by the more makel opinion. So therefore, I will say, ultimately, the Mishnah teaching me two important halachas. Namely, again, that whenever we have a dispute regarding the tchum, ours will be makel. That dispute can manifest itself in two ways. A disparity between the markers. So again, on one direction, called on the north side, left-hand marker goes until x, right-hand marker goes until x plus y. Mishnah teaching me, judge it by the right-hand marker, the x plus y, the further distance. A disparity in opinion. Two people have a machlokes. Reuven says the tchum goes until x. Shimon says the tchum goes until x plus y. We can go with Shimon, who has a larger tchum, a larger measurement, or an amplified measurement of the tchum. Again, provided that the disparity between them is not too great. What's considered to be too great? And I was about to say, if they disagree regarding an amount more than the diagonal of the tchum itself, then already, again, that disparity is too great, and at that point, probably have to just remeasure the tchum. Because the rabbis only said, right, espouse this halacha to be mekel. But second, I will say, what does that mean? Right? What does the Mishnah mean? The Chachamim only said this halacha to be mekel and not to be machmir. Really? Really, meaning at the end of the day, this is a chumrah of Chazal. Right? Remember again, midaraisa, there's no such concept of tchum. Midaraisa, you want to go ahead and you want to travel as far as you want on Shabbos. That's your prerogative. Chazal came along and said, no, you have 2,000 amis. So how can you tell me Chazal only said this to be mekel, not to be machmir? The whole thing is a chumrah. To which the Gemara says, Amar Avina, lo lahakil al divrei Torah, ela lahachmir al divrei Torah, utchumin d'Rabbanan. So you're right. The Chachamim came along to be machmir on divrei Torah. The Torah did not have the concept of tchum, but Chazal felt that in order to safeguard aspects of the sanctity of Shabbos, we have to institute a concept called tchum. But when they instituted this halacha, obviously there's a din d'Rabbanan, and like any din d'Rabbanan, suffik d'Rabbanan l'kula. Whenever you have doubts regarding rabbinic law, of course we will deal with it leniently. Look at Rashi. Lo lahakil al divrei Torah, kol ma shegazucha mitchumin lahachmir al divrei Torah, ba'u But so what Chazal legislated regarding Tchumen, that was to be machmir. That was to be machmir. How so? The midoraisa lo machseri midi, lo misri midi, because midoraisa will say there is no concept of tchum. None of this is aser. The inhu gazer, and therefore again Chazal legislated the halachos of tchum. Hilchach as linan behulakula the hatchumin atzman midrabanan. So we'll say, so interestingly enough, the legislation of tchum is a rabbinic chumrah. But once it is a rabbinic chumrah, whenever it comes to doubt regarding rabbinic law, we are always mekel and not machmir. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, whenever you have these doubts regarding measurements or machloksim between people who measure the tchum, halacha l'maisa, again, we will be mekel. Good. That's the Mishnah. It says, new Mishnah, no Testament Aleph, Ir Shal Yachid, V'nasish Rabim. So we'll say this is an interesting halacha. If you have an Ir Shal Yachid, which we'll call a private city, we'll define these in just a moment, and then it became an Ir Shal Rabim, and then it became a public city. So what's the halacha? Ir Shal Yachid V'nasish Ir Shal Rabim. So as a private city became public city, Ma'ar V'neskulu, you can make an Eruv throughout the entire city. And I'm about to say, what are we talking about? Look at Rashi. Ir Shal Yachid. So first of all, Rashi gives definitions. What is an Ir Shal Yachid? Shelo hayu nichnasin ba tamid samech ribo shel bnei adam v'lo chashiv rosh sarabim delo dami l'digali amibar. Suppose Rashi understands over here that an Ir Shal Yachid, a private city, is a city that has less than 600,000 people traveling through it. Now, we'll say the truth is, this happens to be machlokes harishonim. Some understand Ir Shal Yachid to literally mean a city owned by an individual. City owned by an individual versus an Ir Shal Rabim, a city owned by the public. But we're going to go with Rashi, that Ir Shal Yachid means a city essentially that doesn't qualify as a real Rosh Hashanah. So and Rosh Hashanah has a definition, 600,000 people travel through it every day, right? It has roads that are more than 16 amos wide. So according to Rashi, Ir Shal Yachid means a city which does not have pedestrian traffic of more than 600,000. Versus Ir Shal Rabim, Rashi says, "Shinitosu ba'dirin o nikvu ba'shukim." So let's listen to this. So therefore, the case of the Mishnah is as follows: you have a city that was an Ir Shal Yachid, a private city, we'll call it, right? Less than 600,000. Then again, there was an influx of residents, and suddenly again, it becomes a public city, an Ir Shal Rabim. So what's that? What did the Mishnah say? You can make an Eruv throughout the entire city. The Rabbi said, now this is actually very interesting. Look at Rashi. Ma'arvin eskula. What does this mean? Kibetchila ve'in b'va'osat tzrichin tikun sharhi kechatzer achos ukigon she'in baruch sarabim gimura shal tez zayin ama v'myesh ba mefarish b'gemara takayt lo shram shabuzach. Listen to this. The issue that we're going to see over here, that's going to come up, is as follows. Chazal were concerned, if you have an Ir Shal Rabim, you have to go ahead, you cannot make an Eruv that goes ahead and encompasses the entire city. What are we concerned about? That if you have an Eruv that encompasses the entire city, people will forget about the concept of Hotzah. They will forget about the notion of carrying. I'm sorry, I should say, we've transitioned back now to a discussion regarding Eruv Chatzeros, and we've left Eruv Tchumen for a little bit. So in general, we're going to say, the Mishnah is going to say this, but in general, Chazal did not want you to make an Eruv which encompasses an entire Ir Shal Rabim. Because we'll say that means you're going to live in a city that has 600,000 people, the entire city has an Eruv, people could carry, people will forget about the concept of Hotzah. They will forget about the concept about there's a prohibition to carry on Shabbos between certain Shabbos. By the way, if you think about this, just a moment. So the truth is, people today who grow up in cities with an Eruv, right, never know, could go up never knowing. Again, the only time you really know that there's concept of Hotzah is when if the Eruv is down. And then there's such a bahala because people literally don't know the halachas. So Chazal, in order to avoid that, essentially said a public city must have an excluded area, an area which is excluded from the Eruv. By excluding it from the Eruv, you ensure that people remember the concept of Hotzah. What's unique in this case over here is the city has transitioned. So you had a city which started as the Ir Shal Yachid, a private city. Now, a private city, there's no problem going ahead and making Eruv throughout the entire city. And then it became an Ir Shal Rabim. Nevertheless, the Mishnah says, Ma'arvin eskula. you could still go ahead and make an Eruv throughout the entire city. And I will say the logic behind that is, since it was originally an Ir Shel Yachid, so it's interesting, people kind of identify cities through their original designation. So since it was originally an Ir Shel Yachid, even though it subsequently became an Ir Shel Rabim, you can go ahead and make an Eruv around the entire city. And we're not concerned that people are going to forget about Hotzah, because people still identify this city as an Ir Shel Yachid. However, V'Shel Rabim V'Nas Shel Yachid, but I will say if it was a public city, 600,000 people, but then again people moved out and it became an Ir Shel Yachid, Ein Ma'arvin Eskula. Halacha l'maisa, you cannot go ahead and make an Eruv around the entire city. Ela imkein asa chutzala. Also, you have to leave some area unincluded, right? It's excluded, I should say, excluded from the Eruv. How much? Ki'er chadasha shebi Yehuda, sheisha chamish dir. So it says machlokes about like how much of an area do you have to exclude. So Rabbi Yehuda says like a new city in Yehuda, which is 50 residents. You have to leave an area of 50 residents excluded from the Eruv. Rabbi Shimon Omer gimel chatzeros shel shnei batim. Rabbi Shimon says you just have to exclude 3 chatzeros that have at least 2 homes per chatzer. We'll say take a look at Rashi. V'shel rabim v'nasa shel yachid. So again, if you have a public city that became a private city, you cannot go ahead and include the entire city in the Eruv. Rather, you must exclude some part. Rashi says over here, V'shel rabim v'nasa shel yachid. Rabu sashmo inon. The afal gav dinasa shel yachid ein ma'arvin eskula hoyel utchilasa shel rabim the dilma hadra umis avda shel rabim va'asu la'aruva kula va'asu la'ariv ir shel rabim below shir va'afal gav din baruch shram gimur shel tishtachach tor shel rabim. Suppose listen to this. What's the concern? If you have an ir shel rabim that became an ir shel yachid, so the Mishnah says even though an ir shel yachid technically you can include in an eruv, but what we're concerned about says what's going to happen. Maybe the city will revert back to being an Ir Shel Rabim again. And if it reverts back to being an Ir Shel Rabim again and you have it totally enclosed, people will forget about the concept of Eruv. So therefore I will say, halacha l'maisa, what the Mishnah teaches me, first there's really 3 halachas. Halacha number 1, which is apparently an Ir Shel Rabim, which is a city that has 600,000 residents. And I will say, it may not have an actual Ir Shel Rabim thoroughfare, but it has 600,000 residents. You cannot enclose that entire area in an Eruv. You must leave an excluded area. The size of the excluded area is a machlokes in the Mishnah. Now, but Ir Shel Yachid, individual city, less than 600,000 residents, can be totally enclosed in an Eruv. The machlokes comes out, I will say, is what happens when a city transitions. So case number 1 is if it's an Ir Shel Yachid that becomes an Ir Shel Rabim, the Mishnah says you can enclose the entire area. Why? Because people still identify it as an Ir Shel Yachid, and even if the entire thing is enclosed, we're not concerned that a person will come to forget about the concept of Eruv, or of Hotzah, I should say. But if it's an Ir Shel Rabim and becomes an Ir Shel Yachid, in that case, you must leave an area. You must exclude an area from the Eruv. The concern about say is if it reverts back to being an Ir Shel Rabim, and it's totally enclosed, that people will forget about the concept of Hotzah. Good. Says the Mishnah. Hey, says the Gemara, sorry. What's the case of a private city which becomes a public city? So I'll say the example is the city of the Reish Galusa. Remember again, the Reish Galusa was the head of Babylonian Jewry. So the city where the Reish Galusa lives, that's an example of an Ir Shel Yachid, right? A city that originally began as a smaller, we'll call it private city, and then it became an Ir Shel Rabim. Amr Rav Yehuda, I'm sorry, Amr Rav Nachman, my timer. So Rav Nachman said to Rav Yehuda, why did you choose that example? Or why that example? There are so many other examples. If you want to say it's because Rabbi say that people come to the Reish Galusa city because people are always seeking out the Reish Galusa. So that's why ultimately, again, that's an example of an Ir Shel Yachid, which became an Ir Shel Rabim, because people are always there seeking out the Reish Galusa. Rabbi say, but if that's the case, halacha l'maisa, if people are always there, won't they remind each other about the halachas of Shabbos, won't they remind each other that even if they see that each other carrying there, they'll remind each other that is only over here because ultimately this is an Irshal Rabbim, but an Irshal Yachad, but an Irshal Rabbim, we wouldn't do this. If that's the case, that we are relying on Jews to remind each other about the halacha, Kulu Yisrael Nami B'tzarfa de Shabbos Shchichi Gabi Hadadi. We'll say in general, Shabbos morning, many Jews are out and about. Rashi says over here, why are they out and about? Shlichi Adadi, Lishma Drasha. They're coming to hear the drasha, right? Jews are out and about to go ahead and hear the drasha, right? It's interesting, it doesn't even say davening. It says to hear the drasha. So because of that, again, in general, why don't we rely on the fact that people will remind each other about things? To which the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman could go diskarta dinas zuzoi. So the Gemara says, so example is the city of Nasuzoi. Okay, so we'll say, it's just Rashi says, krach shel osa ish. This was the name of a particular city. I will say, so all the Gemara was saying over here is, the city of the Reish Galusa was just an example. It wasn't meant to be advanced as a paradigmatic example of this, but the idea is any city which began as a small city, what we call Ir Shal Yachid, and became an Ir Shal Rabim, the halacha is that ultimately, again, you're permitted to include the entire Eruv, the entire city in an Eruv. Tan Rabbanon, Ir Shal Yachid v'nas Shal Rabim, if you have a private city which became a public city, Urush Shal Rabim overes b'socha, Kate said ma'arvenosa. So we'll say this is an interesting halacha. So remember again, if you have an Ir Shal Yachid, which became an Ir Shal Rabim, so what did the Mishnah say? You can make one Eruv for the entire city. For the entire city. Now, both say, now Rashi already pointed this out in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is presupposing in that case that there's no real Rishus Harabim which runs through the entire city. I both say, we remember this from our Shabbos days. If you have a real Rishus Harabim which runs through a city, it's very, very difficult to go ahead and make an Eruv for that type of city. I both say, this is the big controversy with the Eruv in Brooklyn. Right? Brooklyn has Ocean Parkway, right? Ocean Parkway is a Rishus Harabim Da'oraisa. So is there the ability to really go ahead and make an Eruv when you have a biblical Rishus? So this is machlokas. So when the Mishnah speaks about an Ir Shal Yachid that became an Ir Shal Rabim, right? A private city that became a public city. So now there's 600,000 people in the city. The Mishnah is presupposing there's no real Rishus Harabim in there. So you have a lot of people, but there's also, again, if there's no real Rishus Harabim, it's easy to make an Eruv around an entire city. That's not a problem. We'll say, but what happens if that Ir Shal Yachid, which became an Ir Shal Rabim, actually has a Rishus Harabim inside of it? How do you go ahead and make an Eruv for that city? It's very interesting. Ketzad ma'arvin. So what do? Osa lechem mikan v'lechem mikan, okora mikan v'kora mikan. V'nosei be'emtza. All right, so we'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, no problem. Just, we're assuming that, by the way, this is what they call a Rosh Hashanah mifulash. It's a Rosh Hashanah that's open on either side. So we'll say, if you can imagine, really what it is it's a Rosh Hashanah that runs through the entirety of the city, open on both sides. No problem. Just put a lechi on this side, a lechi on that side, a korah on this side, a korah on that side, and you are good to go. So the Gemara says, really? Really, I'm sorry, and therefore again, and then you'd be able to carry inside of the Shurabim as well. So we're going to quote the whole Bryce and then we'll explain it. Furthermore, again, I will say you can't make a partial Eruv Ella o Kula o Mavui. And I will say furthermore again, you can't go ahead and make a partial Eruv, rather either you enclose the entire city or every Mavui does its own Eruv. Look at Rashi. So again, we'll define this in just a moment. You can't go ahead and make an Eruv for one half of the city and an Eruv for the other half of the city. Either you go ahead and you make one Eruv for everyone, or every Mavui is on its own. We'll define the parameters of that. Haisa Sharabim, Vaharihi Sharabim. What happens if a city originally was an Ir Shal Rabim, and it is still an Ir Shal Rabim? I was supposed to say there's been no transition. Amid Beis, ve'ein la ela Pesach echad. But I will say in this case over here, the city, the Rosh Hashanah road only has one opening. It doesn't have two openings. It's not mafulash. It only has one opening. So what's the halacha? Ma'arvines kula. then Rabbi say you'd be able to go ahead and make one Eruv for the entire city. Okay, so Rabbi say now let's deconstruct this brayso a little bit. Man tana din the average sram. So remember again, the first thing the Mishnah said, which at first glance was a little bit surprising, is that halacha l'maisa, if you have an ir shal yachid, which became an ir shal rabbim, but now Rabbi said there is a real rishus harabim which runs through it. There is a 16 amma width road, right? 16 amma wide road that runs through the entire city, is open on both ends, and you have 600,000 people in the city. You now have Rosh Hashanah Daraisa. So the Mishnah said, how do you take care of that? No problem. Lechi on this side, Lechi on the other side, Korah on this side, or Korah on the other side. Says the Gemara, who is the opinion? Man Tanadem Arush Rabbi. I will say, who is the opinion who says that you could include a real bona fide Rosh Hashanah Daraisa in an Eruv? It's Rabbi Huda. What's you've seen this Rabbi Huda many times. The Sanya. Yes, Shalkin Rabbi Huda. Mishyesh lo shnei batim shnei tzid Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Huda says if someone has two homes on two opposite sides of the Rosh Hashanah, osa lechi mikan velechi mikan, you can make a lechi on one. So also remember again, the visual over here is you own two homes across the width of the Rosh Hashanah. Those two homes are opposite each other. So Rabbi Huda said, what can you do? Make a lechi mikan v'lechi mikan. Make a lechi on both sides, by both homes, or a korah on both sides, v'nosei in be'emtza. And then Rabbi Huda says you could carry in between the two homes across the Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara says, Amru lo. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Huda, ve'ein ma'avin Rosh Hashanah mikach. So ultimately, again, you're not allowed to make a. You can't make an eruv on Rosh Hashanah Dara. He said it doesn't work. To which the Gemara says, so both say, so therefore again, first part of the Brisa, which reflects the view that you can make an Eruv around a bona fide Rosh Hashanah is Rabbi Huda. Okay, that's Aleph. Next, Amr Mar, ve'ema avin osa lechatzon. So also remember again in this same case, so the Mishnah said you cannot make an Eruv for part of the city. Rather, either you make an Eruv for the entire city. Remember again, we'll say, this is still the same case. This is the Ir Shal Yachid, private city, which becomes a public city and has a Rosh Hashanah which runs through it. So in the next case, Rabbi says the Gemara, I'm sorry. So Papa says that's only true, Rabbi, that you can't split the city in half along its length. Bless you, along its length. But by its width, Rabbosai, you can go ahead and split it up. Rabbosai, now what's the chap over here? So the issue over here is if you split it across its length, someone's going to lose access to the Rishus Harabim. And Rabbosai, that is an impossibility because everyone, remember, I'm sorry, let me clarify this. The image, the way the Gemara is operating is, you have an Ir Shal Yachid that became an Ir Shal Rabim, and there is a Rosh Hashanah that runs through it. When we say Rosh Hashanah runs through, it literally means what? The Rosh Hashanah runs through the middle of the city. So if you split it along its length, the assumption is you're splitting it along the Rosh Hashanah, which means that someone may not have complete access to that Rosh Hashanah. But if you split it along the width, we'll say, what does that effectively mean? Each side of the city has access to what? To its side of the Rosh Hashanah. So as long as people have access to the side of Rosh Hashanah, they can get out of the city on one end. Ultimately, again, that is going to be that is a sufficient split. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Ela la'arka, derech hayaros lios pischei filushen la'arka, Rosh Hashanah moveres mi Pesach la'Pesach, v'chaluka la'arka hilchach ein b'nei Evra halos, Rashon la'ariv levadan, u'b'nei Evra halos levadan, mishum dahani v'hani, darsi b'hach Rosh Hashanah, v'yotzim v'nichnasim derech psachim l'kan l'kan, u'Rosh Hashanah mishum mechabrasan shekulam me'uravin ba v'asri adadi. So the issue over here is that since they're both going to be utilizing the same space, they are effectively one entity. So if you split it along the length and they're both utilizing the same space and both exiting the city in the same ways, then they're joined. And therefore, again, two Eruvin will not work. But if you split the city according to its width, so everyone has their own defined demarcated area, their own part of the Rosh Hashanah, as well as their own entrance or exit, then Allah Chalamai said that could work. Kiman, to look Rabbi Akiva. We'll say, who is that opinion? Like, that's Rabbi Akiva. What? Not like Rabbi Akiva, I'm sorry. Why? Both is very interesting because what did Rabbi Akiva say? Dear Rabbi Akiva, ha'amar regal hamutaris bimkoma, osaras afilu shelo bimkoma. So listen to this. Rabbi Akiva literally translated, someone who has a rite of passage in his area could aser based on a rite of passage in a different area. What does this mean? About say, take a look at Rashi. This is actually a very interesting case, which we'll see later on. So the Gemara Rashi says as follows: Regal hamutarvis bimkoma oser shalom bimkoma kigon beis chatzeros zulif nemizos. We'll say here's the case. I have two chatzeros, one inside of the other. So we'll say if you can imagine when we say inside, what it really is, it's behind, right? So you have chatzer A and then chatzer B behind chatzer A. Vachitzona psucha l'shrabim A. Right, A is open to Rosh Hashanah. Va'apnimis in lo pesach Rosh Hashanah eliyotzis derech hitzona. We'll say now, watch this. So A is open to Rosh Hashanah. B only opens up to A. So the only way, let's say, to get from the Rosh Hashanah to B is to walk through A, right? Or for B to get to Rosh Hashanah is to walk through A. So what's that halacha? So it says the Gemara eliyotzis derech hitzona v'lo mibay heichad yerva yudirin shu hitzona v'fan eliyos mutar. Skip down a little bit. Ela filu. Zuli atzma dahavia penimis mutaris bimkoma palig Rabbi Akiva omer drisas haregel dida asra achitzona upenimis mutaris vechitzona asura v'hachanam minisra das. So Rabbi Akiva was like this. In this case, Rabbosai, in this case, the residents of Chatzer B can asr upon the residents of Chatzer A. Why, according to Rabbi Akiva? Because halacha l'maisa, since the only way the residents of Chatzer B can access the Rosh Hashanah is through Chatzer A. Therefore, by definition, the residents of Chatzer B have like a certain level of residence in Chatzer A as well. And therefore, the failure of residents of Chatzer B to join in an Eruv with Chatzer A will prohibit Chatzer A from carrying in their Chatzer as well. That's what it means. Regal ha'oseres bimkoma. Regal ha'oseres bimkoma. What's the lashon? Regal hamutaris bimkoma, sar afilu shelo bimkoma. The residents of B, because ultimately the only way that they could get to the Sham is through A. Halach l'maaseh can prohibit upon Chatzer A if they're not joined in an Eruv. So we'll say, so now why is this important for us? Because remember again what we were just saying. We were just saying that halacha l'maaseh, the Mishnah said as follows. The Bride said as follows: that when you divide this city, ein ma'avnos l'chatzon, you cannot go to make a partial Eruv. So the Gemara says, Rav Papa says that's only true according to its length. But if you divide the city by its width, you can make two separate Eruvim for the city. So the Gemara says, whose opinion does this reflect? It's not Rabbi Akiva. It's not Rabbi Akiva. Because just like Rabbi Akiva says, the residents of Chatzer B will prohibit the residents of Chatzer A unless they join in a joint Eruv. Why? Because the residents of Chatzer B have rights of passage through A, and because they have rights of passage through A, failure to join in a common Eruv will prohibit the residents of A from carrying in their Chatzer. So too Rabbi Akiva would say, even if you split the city down the width, at the end of the day, the left side still has usage of the right, access to the right, and the right has access to the left. If that's the case, failure to join in a joint Eruv should preclude either side from carrying. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, no, even Rabbi Akiva, why? Adkan Lo ka'amar Rabbi Akiva hasam ela b'shtei chatzeros zulif nemizu. Rabbi Akiva only espoused his shita in two chatzeros, one behind the other. It will say again, it used lashon of inside, but you understand, inside doesn't literally mean inside. It means that B is behind A, and the only way for B to get out to the Rosh Hashanah is to walk through A. Ela b'shtei chatzeros zulif nemizu. De pnimis les la pischachrina. Because B has no other access to Rosh Hashanah except through A. So also Rabbi Akiva will say, when B has no other access other than through A, that makes the residents of B like quasi-residents of A, and therefore A can't form an Eruv without B. Aval hacha, Rabbi will say, in this case where you split the city down the width, hani nafki b'hai pischa, v'hani nafki b'hai pischa. Rabbi will say, each side of the city has its own chelik of the Rosh Hashanah, but also has their own entrance and exit. So because each of them have an entrance and exit of their own, perhaps even according to Rabbi Akiva, they will not asr upon each other. Alternate version of this, Amar Papa, Lo tema la arka delo hu delo ma'arvin. So Abba says, you don't even have to mention that if you split it according to its length, split the city according to its length, that won't work. But you might have thought that if you split it according to its width, you could make two Eruvim. Rather, in this version, even if you split it according to its width, you still can't make two Eruvim. Like who? Kiman Rabbi Akiva, like Rabbi Akiva. Ayafilutim Rabbanon. Or it could very well be even according to the Rabbanon. So I'll say even the Rabbanon with the chatzar inside of the other, they held that B does not aser A. Why not? Because they will say B could close its doors and essentially retreat into its chatzar, and for Shabbos it just stays there. They don't go anywhere. Therefore, they don't have to aser A. Aval hacha mi motzu misal kirushram hacha. We'll say, but again, even if you split the city according to its width, is it reasonable to say that some chilek of the city is not going to use part of the Rosh Hashanah? That's much more improbable. So therefore, I will say, in this, remember, we're just going through the Brisa and going through phrase by phrase. So I'll say, in this phrase that said that halacha l'maisa, ein ma'arvenoso lechatzoin, that you can't make a partial Eruv. So say, so just we're going to just go with Rav Papa's statement. The partial Eruv is only problematic when you go and you divide the city along its length. Because since there's shared use of Rosh Hashanah, we can't view the two sides as separate and distinct, and therefore they would have to join in an Eruv together to allow for carrying. But when you split the city along its width, then Einachinami Rabbo say that could work. We could view the city as two distinct entities, since each side has its own Rosh Hashanah, its own entry and exit, and then they could join. Then they could have two separate Eruvin. Good. Amar Mar, O Kula O Mavoi B'fnei Atzmo. So I'll say. So again, the next part of the Brisa says either the whole city has to join into an Eruv, or every Mavoi is on its own. So Maishna de Lechatzo in Delo de Asri Ahadadi Mavoi Mavi Nami Asri Ahadadi. So I'll say, I don't understand. If you just said before that halacha l'maisa, right? We just said, Rapapa just taught us that what? You could split the city along its width, and the two sides could form two separate eruvim, right? So obviously the two sides then will not aser each other. So we'll say ultimately again, mavui mavi nami asri adadi. So we'll say ultimately again, why wouldn't the individual mavuos, if everyone's making their own eruv, why would they not aser upon each other? What's the case? Kigon da'avid daka. So we'll see, interestingly enough, the case is where each mavoi essentially makes its own suras haPesach. It makes its own entrance. So we'll say, if every mavoi, look at Rashi, da'avid daka, Pesach namoch barosh kol mavoi, tegali adatayu la'asaluke kol chadam echavre. So we'll say, if each mavoi makes its own entry, makes its own doorway, that clearly indicates that what? That they have a desire to withdraw from the rest of the city, and therefore, again, they would each be permitted to go ahead and make their own Eruv. V'chi hada amrav idi bar avin amrav chista echem b'nei mavoi she'asa daka lepischo eino oser al b'nei mavoi. So we'll say again, like we saw this case where Idi bar avin says, Echad mibnei mavoi. So one of the residents of the mavoi, who will say, now this is actually talking about if one of the chatzeros, remember again, we'll say you have multiple homes that open up into a chatzer, multiple chatzeros which open up into a shared mavoi. In this case over here, one of the chatzeros doesn't want to be part of the mavoi. They want to do a breakaway chatzer. They want to do their own thing. So we'll say, so what could they do? If that chatzer sets up an entryway, right? It's Tzuras HaPesach, by the entrance we have their chatzer, then Einach Hinami, again, they could form their own Eruv independent of the rest of the chatzeros in the mavoi. So we'll say, see an interesting halacha, which is that if you have an area, in a larger area, that creates its own doorway, its own Tzuras HaPesach, that allows that area to pull out from the other adjoining areas. So for example, in this case of the city I was doing with the Brisa, if each mavoi were to construct its own Pesach, its own doorway, then Einach Hinami, each mavoi would also be permitted to go ahead and make its own Eruv. Haisa shal rabim v'hari. So let's at least begin this. So the Gemara says as follows. So remember again, in this case over here, you have a city shal rabim. You have a city shel rabim, and ultimately again v'hari hi shel rabim. This is continuing the brisa. So Rabbi Zera arva lamasa devi Rabbi Chia v'lo shavek leishir. So Rabbi Zera went ahead and he made an error for the entire city, and he did not go ahead and leave anything out of the city. And I will say, now the city in question over here, Rabbi Zera assumed that the city in question was an Ir Shal Yachid, which became an Ir Shal Rabim. Amarle Abaye, my time Ovid Marhach. He said, why did you do this? Why didn't you leave over a part of the city? Amarle Sabi Dide Amarle Rab Chia Bar Abi Me'arev Kula V'amina Shmamina Ir Shal Yachid V'nasa Shal Rabim He. So we'll say, because ultimately again, Rabbi Zera said, I heard from my elders, Rabbi Chia Bar Asi, that you can make an error for this entire city, and I assumed that this city was an Ir Shal Yachid, which became an Ir Shal Rabim. Amar le ledidi, amar le ahanu sabi, hahi ashba havale mechad gisa. Actually, we're gonna stop over here. We'll pick up in Meretz Hashem with this story. But as we're going to see over here, so Rabbi Zera takes a city, he enclosed the city in its entirety, thinking that it was an Ir Shal Yachid, which became an Ir Shal Rabim, which according to the Mishnah, you could enclose an entire city like that. But we're going to see he was mistaken about the identity of the city. Meretz Hashem to be continued tomorrow.